A drawn gun. A shaking hand. The metallic click of a safety being disengaged is the only sound that cuts through the chilling twilight air. For Dr. Ariana Williams, a cardiologist who mends broken hearts for a living, her own was now pounding against her ribs, her life measured in seconds. It was held in the hands of a police officer whose eyes were filled not with duty, but with a cold, simmering hate. She had followed every rule, every cautious instruction drilled into her since childhood. But it wasn't enough. And as she stared down the dark, unblinking eye of the barrel, she had no idea that her salvation was just 5 seconds away, about to arrive in a form that nobody, least of all the man threatening her life, could have ever predicted. The Volvo's engine hummed a soothing, deep rhythm, a stark contrast to the frantic beat of the day. Dr. Ariana Williams let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders slumping slightly against the plush leather seat. It had been a 16-hour shift. 16 hours of beeping machines, sterile corridors, and the delicate life-or-death dance of cardiac surgery. She had held a human heart in her hands. Today, a tiny failing heart, belonging to a 6-year-old girl named Lily. And against the odds, she had mended it. The memory of the parents' tearful, grateful faces was a warm ember in her chest, the fuel that got her through these exhausting days. She turned off the bustling highway, onto the serene, tree-lined streets of Oak Creek Estates. This was the final stretch, her sanctuary. The neighborhood was a portrait of upper-middle-class, tranquility, manicured lawns, grand 2-story brick homes, and the soft golden glow of porch lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. She loved this time of day, the transition from the world's chaos to the peace of her own home. A small crayon-drawn picture of a smiling stick-figure family was taped to her dashboard, a daily reminder from her 7-year-old son, Leo. Home. She was almost there. That's when the world fractured. Red and blue lights erupted in her rearview mirror, a violent, strobing assault on the peaceful evening. Her heart, the organ she knew so intimately, gave a painful lurch. What she checked her speedometer. She was going exactly 25 miles per hour, the posted speed limit. She meticulously used her turn signal for every corner. She hadn't done anything wrong. Yet the lights were for her. A cold dread, familiar and unwelcome, washed over her. It was an anxiety known to black parents, who give the talk, not about birds and bees, but about traffic stops. Keep your hands visible. Announce every move. Don't argue, just survive. She pulled over to the curb, the crunch of gravel under her tires sounding unnaturally loud. She turned on her interior dome light, placed both hands on top of the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, and waited. A police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer, pulled up behind her. The driver's side door opened, and a man emerged. He was of medium height, but with a thick, barrel-chested build that strained the fabric of his uniform. His face, illuminated by the flashing lights, was etched with a permanent scowl. He walked with a swagger, a deliberate, heavy-footed gait that was meant to intimidate. This was Officer Frank Miller. Ariana didn't know his name yet, but she knew his type. She'd seen it in the news, felt it in the wary stares in certain grocery store aisles. It was a look that judged you before you ever spoke a word. His younger partner, Officer Davis, hung back by the cruiser, his expression more neutral, almost hesitant. Miller stopped just behind her driver's side door, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered Glock. He didn't speak, just shined his flashlight into her car, sweeping it over her face, her passenger seat to the back. The beam lingered on the child's drawing on her dash. "Mom," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The question itself was a trap. "No, officer, I'm not sure," Ariana replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She was a doctor. Composure was her trade. "You failed to come to a complete stop at that last stop sign back there on Chestnut," he said, his tone flat accusatory. Ariana's mind replayed the last 2 minutes. She remembered the stop sign clearly. She always stopped, especially here. It was a 3-second count, a habit ingrained since her driving test. "Officer, with all due respect, I'm certain I made a complete stop. My home is just around the corner." A flicker of annoyance crossed Miller's face. He didn't like being questioned. "I saw what I saw. License and registration." "Of course," she said. Now came the most dangerous part of the script. "Officer, I'm going to reach into the glove compartment now to get my registration. My hands will be in plain sight." She moved with deliberate, exaggerated slowness. She unbuckled her seatbelt, leaned over, and popped the glove compartment open. Her wallet was inside, next to the vehicle's documents. As her hand reached in, Miller's whole posture changed. He tensed up his hand, tightening on his weapon. "What are you reaching for?" He snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "My wallet and registration, sir. Just like you asked. Stay right there. Don't move." Ariana froze her hand, hovering inside the open compartment. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was happening? This was escalating far too quickly. "I'm just getting my documents, officer." "I see you digging around in there." Miller barked, his voice rising in volume and hostility. "You people always have an excuse. What's in there? You got a weapon in there." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, a toxic, venomous cloud. It confirmed everything. This wasn't about a stop sign. "No, sir," Ariana said, her voice trembling slightly now. "I'm a doctor. I have my ID and my car's registration. That's all." "A doctor?" Miller scoffed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "In this car? In this neighborhood? That's a good one. Let me see your hands. Slowly. Out of the compartment. Now." Ariana complied, pulling her hand out empty. "My wallet is right there, officer. I can get it for you." "I'll get it," he snarled. But he didn't move to get it. He just stared at her. His eyes narrowed with suspicion and something darker. A deep-seated prejudice was boiling to the surface. He was creating a narrative in his head, and she was the villain. "I need you to step out of the vehicle, Mom." "Step out? Why?" Ariana asked, a genuine shock in her voice. "I haven't done anything wrong. You asked for my license. I'm giving you a lawful order." "Get out of the damn car!" he roared. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. Officer Davis, his partner, shifted his weight uncomfortably by the cruiser. He could see this was spiraling. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Ariana's composure. She thought of Leo waiting at home for her to read him a bedtime story. She thought of her husband, Marcus, who was probably wondering why she was late. She had to get home. She unlatched her door, but as she moved to push it open, her hospital bag on the passenger seat, heavy with a laptop and medical journals, shifted and fell to the floor with a dull thud. The sound shattered the tense silence. "Gun!" Miller screamed, his training, or perhaps his paranoia, taking over completely. In one fluid, terrifying motion, he unholstered his Glock. He pulled the slide, the chosk of a round being chambered, echoing in the small space between them. He aimed the pistol directly at her chest. "Don't move. Don't you fucking move." Time seemed to warp, slowing to a crawl. Ariana stared at the black hole of the barrel, a perfect circle of death aimed at her heart. The world shrank to that single point. All the years of education, the lives she'd saved, the family she'd built, it was all about to be extinguished over a phantom traffic violation and the color of her skin. The metallic click of the safety being disengaged was the last sound she heard before the world went silent, the roar of blood in her ears drowning out everything else. For Ariana Williams, the world had become a tunnel. At the far end was the muzzle of Officer Miller's Glock 19. Her highly analytical mind, trained to process complex medical data in seconds, was now fixated on the minutiae of her own potential death. The officer's knuckles were white around the grip. His breathing was ragged, a mix of adrenaline and rage. His eyes, wide and unblinking, held a terrifying certainty. He saw a threat, not a person. "I have no weapon." She managed to say, her voice a strained whisper. It was all she could muster. Her throat felt like it was filled with sand. The 16 hours she'd spent on her feet, the delicate sutures she'd placed in a child's heart, the quiet pride of a life, saved all of it, felt a million miles away. Here she was, not Dr. Williams. She was a target. "Shut up!" Miller bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. He took a half step closer, bringing the gun barrel less than 3 feet from her face. "Put your hands on the dash where I can see them now." She did her palms flat against the cool plastic her fingers splayed. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. These were the hands of a surgeon, steady and precise hands that could navigate the intricate pathways of the human vascular system. Now they trembled like a frightened child's. Behind Miller, Officer Davis was now fully alert, his hand on his own weapon, but not drawn. "Frank," he started, his voice laced with caution. "Frank, let's calm down." "She went for something, Davis." "You saw it," Miller yelled back, never taking his eyes off Oriana. "She dropped something heavy. Could be a piece. We don't know." "It was my bag," Ariana pleaded, her voice cracking. "My work bag. It just fell. Please, my son is at home." The mention of her son seemed to enrage Miller further. To him, it was a manipulation, a ploy. "Everyone's got a story. I'm not falling for it." He was lost in his own scenario, a hero in a movie only he was watching. He was taking down a dangerous criminal in a wealthy neighborhood where she didn't belong. Every racist trope he'd ever absorbed was fueling this standoff. The nice car was probably stolen. The story about being a doctor was a lie. He was the thin blue line, and she was the threat he had to neutralize. Ariana squeezed her eyes shut, a single hot tear tracing a path down her cheek. She thought of her husband, Marcus. He was a man of immense calm and strength. He would know what to do. But he was inside, probably setting the table for dinner. He had no idea that just 50 yards from their front door, his wife was on the verge of becoming another statistic, another hashtag. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Each one was a lifetime. The strobing red and blue lights painted the interior of her car in ghastly, alternating shades. The smell of ozone from the police radio crackled in the air. This was it. This was how it ended. A misunderstanding. A lie about a stop sign. A cop with a chip on his shoulder and a gun in his hand. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Miller. She stopped pleading. Her training kicked in, not the medical training, but the training of a lifetime of navigating a world that was often hostile to her existence. She made her expression neutral. She regulated her breathing, slowing it down, trying to project calm, even as her insides were screaming. Any sudden movement, any sign of what he might perceive as aggression, could be the end. "Officer," she said, her voice, now remarkably, even though quiet. "My name is Dr. Ariana Williams. I live at 124 Oak Street." "Right there." She gave a slight nod of her head towards her house, visible just 2 doors down. "I am not a threat to you. I am a cardiologist at St. Michael's General Hospital. My bag, which contains only a laptop and medical texts, fell off the seat. "You are making a terrible mistake." Her calmness seemed to unnerve him more than her fear. He had expected her to cry, to scream, to break. This composure, this articulation, it didn't fit his prejudice. It was cognitive dissonance, and it made him angry. "I'll be the judge of that," he snarled. "Keep your mouth shut." He was talking himself into it. She could see it in his eyes. He was building the justification, the report he would write later. Suspect was non-compliant, made a furtive movement, feared for my life. The words were already forming in his mind. He was a hair's trigger away from pulling his. And in that moment of absolute heart-stopping terror, a sound cut through the night. It was a familiar sound, one she heard every evening, the low mechanical hum of her garage door opening. Miller flinched at the noise, his head jerking towards the sound for a fraction of a second. It was an instinctive reaction. For Ariana, that sound was the tolling of a bell. She didn't know if it signaled her doom or her salvation. Someone was coming out. Marcus. He was coming to see what the commotion was. Her heart seized with a new kind of fear. If Marcus came out and saw a gun pointed at his wife, his reaction would be primal. And a black man rushing towards a tense police situation was a death sentence. "No," she whispered, a desperate, silent prayer. "Marcus, no, stay inside." But it was too late. The garage was open. The interior lights of a black Cadillac Escalade flashed on. The engine turned over with a deep, powerful roar. Officer Miller refocused on her, his face a mask of confusion and rage. "Who the hell is that? You got backup coming." Before Ariana could answer, the Escalade rolled slowly out of the driveway and stopped in the street, its powerful LED headlights cutting through the flashing police lights, illuminating the entire scene like a stage. The driver's side door opened. A figure emerged, silhouetted by the intense headlights. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with an economy and purpose that spoke of years of discipline. He took a few steps forward into the light, and his form became clear. It was her husband, Marcus Williams, and he was wearing his full-dress uniform. The man who stepped out of the Escalade was not just a husband concerned about his wife. He was an image of pure, undiluted authority. Colonel Marcus Williams of the United States Army stood at his full height of 6'3", his posture ramrod straight. He was returning from a formal command dinner at the nearby base, and he was immaculate. His Army service uniform, the formal dress blues, was perfectly pressed. Gleaming gold buttons ran down the front of the jacket. On his shoulders, the silver eagles of a full colonel shone under the streetlights. But it was the array of ribbons and medals on his left breast that told the real story. The Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star. 2 bronze stars with V for Valor, the Purple Heart. It was a roadmap of a 25-year career spent in the most dangerous places on Earth. It was a testament to leadership, courage, and sacrifice. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked forward, his polished black shoes making a quiet, rhythmic sound on the pavement. He assessed the scene with the practiced eye of a man who had commanded battalions in combat zones. He saw the police cruiser. He saw the flashing lights. And he saw Officer Frank Miller, his weapon drawn and pointed directly at his wife, who was sitting terrified in her car. A cold, controlled fury, more terrifying than any scream, settled over Colonel Williams's features. Officer Miller was momentarily stunned. His brain, already addled with adrenaline and prejudice, struggled to process the figure approaching him. His first thought was that this was some kind of security guard in a fancy costume. But the bearing, the confidence, the sheer, palpable aura of command, that wasn't something you could fake. "Sir, you need to stay back," Miller yelled, his voice cracking slightly. He shifted his stance, trying to keep his gun on Ariana while also addressing the imposing figure. "This is an active police situation." Colonel Williams did not stop. He closed the distance until he was about 15 feet away, a safe but commanding position. He stopped and stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back. The position was relaxed, yet it radiated power. "I am Colonel Marcus Williams, United States Army," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with the clarity of a bugle call. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. "You have a firearm aimed at my wife, Dr. Ariana Williams. You will provide me with your name and badge number, and then you will explain to me with extreme clarity why you are threatening the life of a civilian on a public street." The shift in the power dynamic was instantaneous and absolute. Miller's jaw worked silently for a moment. The name, rank, and the undeniable authenticity of the uniform hit him like a physical blow. Cops, especially those with a tough guy persona like Miller, often held a deep respect for the military. But this wasn't just some grunt. This was a colonel, a field-grade officer. In his world, a colonel was a general in all but name. I am Officer Miller," he stammered, his bravado evaporating like mist. "Badge number 734. The suspect was non-compliant." The word suspect hung in the air. Colonel Williams's eyes narrowed to slits. "Suspect," he repeated, his voice dropping a full octave laced with icy contempt. "Officer Miller, my wife is a cardiothoracic surgeon who just finished a 16-hour shift saving lives at St. Michael's. The only thing she is a suspect of is being a black woman driving a nice car in a neighborhood you don't think she belongs in. Is that about the size of it?" Miller flinched as if he'd been struck. The colonel had dissected the entire situation in seconds and laid it bare. Behind Miller, Officer Davis had now fully emerged from the shadow of the cruiser. He saw the colonel's uniform, heard his words, and a look of profound dread washed over his face. He knew in that instant that this traffic stop was going to be the end of his partner's career, and it might just cripple his own. "Frank, put the weapon down," Davis said, his voice firm, pleading. "Now." But Miller was trapped. He had escalated the situation to the point of no return. To back down now, in front of this powerful man, felt like a complete humiliation. His ego, fragile and toxic, wouldn't allow it. He kept the gun trained on Ariana, his arm trembling, not from fear, but from a stubborn, foolish pride. She made a furtive movement. He insisted, his voice now sounding whiny, desperate. "I had to draw my weapon." Colonel Williams took one more step forward. His eyes were locked on Miller's. He didn't look at the gun. He looked at the man holding it. It was a classic command technique address, the person, not the weapon. "Officer Miller," the colonel said, his voice dangerously calm. "You have 5 seconds to lower your weapon and call your supervisor to this location. 5. He didn't start counting. He just let the number hang in the air, an ultimatum backed by the full weight of his presence. 4. The word was spoken with the finality of a judge's gavel. Ariana, still in the car, watched the scene unfold. Seeing her husband, her strong, steadfast Marcus, take control of the situation was like a dam breaking inside her. The terror began to recede, replaced by a wave of profound relief, so intense it made her dizzy. 3. Miller's face was a mess of conflicting emotions. Panic, anger, humiliation. He glanced from the imposing colonel to the terrified woman in the car. The world he had constructed where he was the unquestionable authority was crumbling around him. 2. Officer Davis took a step towards his partner. "Frank, for God's sake, he's a colonel. Listen to him, it's over." The pleading in his partner's voice, the unwavering stare of the colonel, the flashing lights that were now illuminating his own gross misconduct, it all came crashing down on Frank Miller. His arm, the one holding the Glock, finally went limp. The gun lowered the barrel, pointing towards the pavement. The immediate threat was gone. "One." Colonel Williams finished softly his point made. He then pulled out his own cell phone. "I am now calling the Chief of Police, John Steinberg. He and I serve on the city's Veterans Affairs Board together. I am sure he will be very interested to hear how his officers are conducting themselves tonight." The blood drained from Officer Miller's face. He hadn't just pulled a gun on a random woman. He had pulled a gun on the wife of a decorated army colonel who had the police chief on speed dial. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a career-ending catastrophe. The moment Miller's gun lowered, the spell was broken. The immediate life-threatening tension dissipated, but was replaced by a heavy, suffocating atmosphere of consequence. The strobing police lights, which moments ago felt menacing, now seemed to be exposing Miller's actions for all the world to see. Colonel Williams did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. His movements remained deliberate and controlled. While still on the phone, presumably leaving a message for the Chief of Police, he fixed his gaze on Officer Davis. "Officer," he said, his voice still carrying that unmistakable command tone. "You witnessed this entire interaction. You will be making a full statement, I trust." Davis, who looked pale and shaken, nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, absolutely." He wanted to be as far away from Miller's sinking ship as possible. He had seen his partner's escalating aggression and had failed to intervene decisively until the very end. He knew his own conduct would be scrutinized. Miller, meanwhile, seemed to shrink. The barrel-chested bravado was gone, replaced by the posture of a man who knew he was utterly and completely ruined. He holstered his weapon with a shaky hand, the click of the plastic, seeming to echo the closing of a door on his career. He wouldn't make eye contact with the colonel, instead staring at the pavement, as if searching for an escape that wasn't there. "Supervisor," he mumbled into his shoulder mic, his voice hoarse. "Requesting a supervisor at my location, 122 Oak Street." "What was the pretense for this stop, Officer Miller?" the colonel asked, ending his call and slipping his phone back into his jacket pocket. The question was not a request. It was a demand for an official accounting. A rolling stop." Miller said the lie sounding feeble even to his own ears. "A rolling stop," Colonel Williams repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "And a rolling stop in this city is a minor traffic infraction. Is it not a ticketable offense, but one that hardly warrants drawing your service weapon on an unarmed woman who is complying with your orders? Or was there more to it?" Miller remained silent. What could he say? "I pulled her over because I didn't think she belonged here. I drew my weapon because my own prejudice made me see a threat where there was none." Ariana, seeing that the immediate danger had passed, finally opened her car door and stepped out. Her legs felt weak like jelly, but she stood tall. She walked to her husband's side, and he immediately wrapped a strong, protective arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. For the first time, she looked directly at Officer Miller, not with fear, but with a cold, clear pity. He looked pathetic. Within 5 minutes, another patrol car arrived, this one with a sergeant's stripes on the sleeve of the officer driving. Sergeant Riley was a veteran cop in his late 50s, with tired eyes that had seen everything. He stepped out of his car, took one look at the scene, and his shoulders slumped. He saw a decorated army colonel in his dress blues comforting his wife. He saw his own officer, Frank Miller, looking pale and guilty. He saw the junior officer, Davis, looking like he wanted to be on another planet. Riley knew before a single word was spoken that this was a Grade A department-level disaster. "Colonel Williams," Sergeant Riley said, his tone immediately deferential as he read the rank insignia. "I'm Sergeant Riley. What seems to be the problem here?" "The problem, Sergeant Colonel Williams," replied, his voice still dangerously calm, "is that your Officer Miller pulled over my wife on a false pretext, escalated a simple traffic stop into a life-threatening situation, and drew his firearm on her without any provocation or justifiable cause. The entire incident was a disgusting abuse of power, motivated, I can only assume, by racial prejudice." Every word was a hammer blow. Riley's face tightened. He looked at Miller. "Miller, is this true? You drew your weapon." "Sarge, she made a furtive movement. I thought she was reaching for a weapon." Miller tried his excuse, sounding weaker with every repetition. "Did you find a weapon?" "Officer," the colonel interjected. "Well, no, but—" "Did you see a weapon?" "No." "Did my wife threaten you in any way, verbally or physically?" "No, but her bag fell, and so you drew your weapon because a woman's purse fell off a car seat." Colonel Williams finished laying the absurdity of the situation bare. Sergeant Riley closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a weary sigh. He turned to Miller, his voice now devoid of any sympathy. "Miller, give me your weapon. You and Davis sit in your vehicle. Do not speak to each other. Do not touch your radio. Do not do anything until I tell you to. Is that understood?" The order was the ultimate humiliation for a police officer being disarmed at a scene. Miller's face, already pale, turned ashen. Without a word, he carefully unholstered his Glock and handed it to the sergeant grip first. He and Davis then retreated to their cruiser, the invisible wall of shame and consequence now separating them. Sergeant Riley turned back to the Williamses. His entire demeanor was now one of damage control. "Colonel Dr. Williams, on behalf of the department, I am profoundly sorry. This is unacceptable. I assure you a full and immediate internal affairs investigation will be launched. Officer Miller has been placed on administrative leave effective immediately." Ariana finally spoke, her voice clear and strong, resonating with the authority she commanded in the operating room. "Sergeant, unacceptable doesn't begin to cover it. Your officer nearly executed me in front of my own home because he didn't like the color of my skin. This isn't a matter for administrative leave. It's a matter of public safety. That man should not have a badge and a gun." Sergeant Riley couldn't meet her gaze. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I understand." As they stood there, the blue and red lights still washing over their faces, Ariana knew this was far from over. A complaint would be filed. An investigation would happen. But the trauma of staring down that gun barrel would remain. And for Frank Miller, the unraveling had only just begun. He had picked a fight with the wrong family, and the full weight of his actions was about to come crashing down upon him. The days following the incident were a blur of sterile rooms and formal procedures. Ariana and Marcus spent hours with detectives from the Internal Affairs Division recounting every single detail of the stop. They sat across from grim-faced men in suits who asked pointed questions, their sessions recorded from multiple angles. Ariana, with her surgeon's precision, recalled every word Miller had said. His tone, the look in his eyes. Marcus, with his strategic military mind, laid out the timeline, the lack of provocation, and the clear abuse of protocol. Their complaint was not just a piece of paper. It was a bombshell. A decorated army colonel and a respected surgeon. It was the kind of case that made city officials sweat. This wasn't a he said, she said, with a marginalized victim who could be easily dismissed. The Williamses were pillars of the community, unimpeachable witnesses. The department's initial response was predictable. Officer Miller was suspended, with pay pending the outcome of the investigation. The police union issued a statement urging the public not to rush to judgment and to respect due process. It was standard procedure, a boilerplate defense designed to protect their own. But then the second shoe dropped the body cam footage. Officer Davis's camera had captured the entire event from a clearer, more objective angle than Miller's. While Miller's camera showed mostly the interior of the car, Davis's showed the full context: Ariana's slow, deliberate movements, her calm, respectful tone, and Miller's escalating, unhinged aggression. Most damningly, it captured the audio perfectly. Miller's sneering, "A doctor in this car, in this neighborhood," and the hateful slur, "You people." The footage was leaked. No one knew exactly how a disgruntled clerk, a hacker, an officer who believed in justice. But within hours it was on every news channel and social media platform. The video went viral, a firestorm of public outrage. The clip was horrifying. The nation saw a calm, articulate, black woman being terrorized by a snarling, unprofessional cop. They heard the thud of the bag falling. They saw Miller draw his weapon with terrifying speed. And then they saw the dramatic arrival of Colonel Marcus Williams, a real-life hero stepping into the frame. The story was too compelling, the injustice too blatant to ignore. Justice for Dr. Williams trended on Twitter for 3 days straight. News vans camped out at the end of Oak Street. Ariana and Marcus were inundated with requests for interviews, all of which they politely declined, releasing a single statement through a lawyer emphasizing their faith in the system to hold the officer accountable. For Frank Miller, the world collapsed. His name, his face, his badge number were everywhere. He was no longer an anonymous officer. He was the poster child for racist policing. His address was leaked online. He and his family were forced to stay with his wife's sister in a neighboring state. His children were harassed at school. His wife Sarah, a quiet woman who worked as a librarian, couldn't go to the grocery store without getting hostile stares or being accosted by strangers. The police department, facing a PR apocalypse, acted swiftly. The internal investigation, which could have dragged on for months, was concluded in a week. The evidence was irrefutable. Chief of Police John Steinberg, the man Marcus served on a board with, held a press conference. The actions of former officer Frank Miller are a disgrace to this department, and to the badge, Steinberg said, his face grim. They do not reflect the values of the men and women who serve this city with honor. His employment has been terminated effective immediately. We have forwarded our findings to the district attorney's office for consideration of criminal charges. Fired. The word hit Miller like a physical blow. He lost his job, his health insurance, and because he was fired for cause, his pension was in jeopardy. The union, seeing the toxic nature of the case and the overwhelming evidence, offered only a token legal defense before quietly distancing themselves. Miller was too radioactive to save. He became a pariah. His friends on the force stopped returning his calls. The blue wall of silence had crumbled around him. He was a liability. He spent his days in his sister-in-law's dim basement, endlessly scrolling through the hateful comments online, watching his life being dismantled piece by piece. He grew a beard, lost weight, and his eyes took on a haunted, hollow look. He drank heavily, trying to numb the rage and the crushing self-pity. In his mind, he was the victim. He was the one whose life had been ruined over a simple misunderstanding. He railed against the liberal media, cancel culture, and the Williamses, who he saw as vindictive elites who had used their power to destroy him. He never once considered that he was the sole architect of his own destruction. His wife Sarah tried to be supportive at first, but his bitterness was a poison that infected everything. Their arguments became more frequent, more vicious. "It was one mistake, Sarah," he'd roar. "You pulled a gun on an innocent woman. Frank, She'd scream back, her voice filled with a pain he couldn't comprehend. "You could have killed her. You could have orphaned her son. Do you even hear yourself?" The fallout was more than just professional and social. It was a deep moral, rotting from the inside out. Frank Miller had lost his job, his reputation, and his friends. But the true hard karma, the kind that twists the knife with poetic, inescapable irony, was still waiting in the wings. And it was about to strike at the one area of his life he had left to lose. 6 months passed. The media storm subsided, replaced by the next cycle of outrage. The world, for the most part, moved on. Ariana and Marcus Williams worked hard to restore a sense of normalcy for their family. They installed a better security system, but the deeper scars remained. Ariana felt a jolt of anxiety every time she saw a police car. Leo had nightmares after overhearing snippets of news reports. They were healing, but slowly. The district attorney's office had pressed charges against Frank Miller, official oppression, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The legal battle would be long and drawn out. Meanwhile, Frank Miller's life continued its downward spiral. His savings dwindled, eaten up by legal fees. He took a job as an overnight security guard at a warehouse complex, a humiliating fall from grace. The uniform was cheap polyester, the power non-existent. He spent his nights walking empty corridors, a ghost haunted by the man he used to be. The one bright spot, the one anchor in his life, was his wife, Sarah. Despite their fighting, she had stayed. She was the only one who hadn't completely abandoned him. And then that anchor began to rust. Sarah had always had a minor heart murmur, something doctors had monitored, but never been overly concerned about. But lately she was getting worse. She was constantly fatigued, short of breath. She fainted twice once while climbing the stairs. Their local doctor, concerned, referred them to a cardiologist in the city. The tests came back with a grim diagnosis, a rare and aggressive form of mitral valve prolapse, complicated by a congenital defect in her heart's muscular wall. It was a ticking time bomb. The cardiologist was blunt. "Standard surgical procedures are too risky for Sarah," he explained, pointing to an echocardiogram on the screen. "The tissue is too degraded. There's only one person on this coast, maybe in the country, who has had consistent success with a new, experimental procedure, a minimally invasive, robotic-assisted valve repair that could work for her. It's her best and, frankly, her only real shot." A sliver of hope cut through Frank's despair. "Who is it will do anything? We'll pay anything." The cardiologist tapped his pen on a notepad and wrote down a name and a hospital. "Her name is Dr. Ariana Williams. She's the head of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Michael's General." The name hit Frank Miller with the force of a physical impact. He stared at the piece of paper as if it were a venomous snake. It couldn't be. It was a joke, a sick, cosmic joke. He looked up at the cardiologist, his face a mask of disbelief. "Ariana Williams," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "That's her," the doctor said, oblivious. "She's a genius. Literally wrote the book on this technique. Getting an appointment is like winning the lottery, but given the severity of Sarah's case, I'll make the call myself. I'll push for you." Frank couldn't breathe. The walls of the small office seemed to be closing in. The world had conspired to deliver the most exquisitely cruel form of justice he could possibly imagine. The life of his wife, the only person he had left, was now in the hands of the woman whose life he had almost taken. The woman he had sneered at, belittled and terrorized. The woman he had privately, and sometimes publicly, called every vicious name he could think of since his downfall. He and Sarah drove home in a stunned silence. Sarah, weak and frightened, didn't understand the depth of his reaction. She just knew the name sounded vaguely familiar. Williams, she said softly from the passenger seat. Why do I know that name? Frank gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. No reason. He lied, his voice tight. She's just a doctor. But for the next 2 weeks, as they waited for the appointment, the name was a constant torment. It echoed in his mind a relentless accusation. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the image of him pointing his gun at her, burned into his consciousness. He had seen her as a caricature, a suspect, a thing to be controlled. He had stripped her of her humanity. Now her humanity, her skill, her intelligence, her compassion was the only thing that could save his wife. The day of the appointment arrived. It was a cold, rainy November morning. Frank drove them to St. Michael's the Grand Hospital, looming like a cathedral of judgment. He felt sick to his stomach. He sat with Sarah in the plush, quiet waiting room of the advanced cardiac unit, surrounded by hushed conversations and the faint rhythmic beeping of distant machines. Every time a door opened, his heart leaped into his throat. Finally, a nurse called out, "Sarah Miller." Sarah, weak but hopeful, stood up. "Frank, are you coming?" He couldn't. "No." He croaked his throat dry. "You go. I'll wait here." He watched his wife walk down the long, sterile corridor and disappear through a set of double doors. He buried his face in his hands, a broken man adrift in a sea of his own making. He was powerless. All he could do was wait for the verdict to be delivered by the woman he had wronged in the most profound way. He was about to come face to face with his karma, and it was wearing a white lab coat and a stethoscope. An hour passed like a lifetime. Frank Miller sat in the waiting room, a statue of misery. He watched other families come and go, their faces etched with worry or relief. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. The double doors at the end of the hall swung open. A figure in a crisp white doctor's coat emerged, studying a chart on a tablet. The figure looked up, and Frank's heart stopped. It was her. Dr. Ariana Williams. She looked different here in her element. She moved with an air of confidence and purpose that was even more commanding than her husband's. Her expression was serious, focused. This was her kingdom, and she was its queen. She hadn't seen him yet. She was speaking quietly to a nurse, pointing to something on the tablet. Frank felt an impulse to run, to hide, to simply vanish. But his feet were rooted to the floor. He was paralyzed by the gravity of the moment. Dr. Williams finished her conversation with the nurse, and then her eyes swept the waiting room. They passed over him, then snapped back, a flicker of recognition in their depths. Her professional calm faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes, which had been compassionate and analytical, turned cool, guarded. She remembered him. Of course she remembered him. How could she ever forget the face of the man who pointed a gun at her heart? For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the hushed expanse of the waiting room. No words were exchanged, but everything was said. In her eyes, he saw not hatred, but the cool, distant memory of trauma. He saw the ghost of the fear he had inflicted upon her. Ariana took a deep, centering breath, her professional composure clicking back into place like armor. She walked towards him, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. She stopped a few feet away, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice even and clinical, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice she used to deliver difficult news. "Doctor," he managed to choke out. The word felt like ash in his mouth. "I have just finished the initial consultation with your wife, Sarah." She continued, her gaze unwavering. "Her case is indeed complex. The diagnosis from her previous cardiologist is accurate. The procedure she needs is one I specialize in." Frank could only nod his throat too tight to speak. This was it. The moment of judgment. She held all the cards. She could refuse. She could say she wasn't comfortable treating his wife, and no one would blame her. She could recommend another surgeon, knowing full well there was no one else who could offer the same chance of success. She could, with a few simple, professionally phrased words, effectively condemn his wife to a slow, inevitable decline. It would be a quiet, clean, and perfectly justifiable revenge. He searched her face for a sign of triumph, of malice, of satisfaction at his predicament. He found none. There was only a profound, weary stillness. "Her condition is serious," Dr. Williams said. "We need to schedule the surgery as soon as possible. My assistant will be out in a moment to coordinate with you. We have an opening next Tuesday." Frank stared at her, uncomprehending. You'll do it," he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. After what I did." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Ariana's face. It was not anger or pity, but a kind of steely resolve. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice softening just a fraction, but losing none of its strength. "What you did to me on that street was a violation. It was an act of hate that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You saw a black woman, and you decided I was a threat. You saw a monster that existed only in your own mind." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But right now in that room, I don't see your wife as your wife. I see a patient. I see a woman with a failing heart who needs my help. My oath as a doctor, my duty to my patient does not get suspended because of the sins of her husband. I am not you, Officer Miller. I don't define people by who they're connected to. I will give your wife the absolute best of my skill and care, not for you, but for her and for the oath I took. Do you understand?" The distinction was clear, and it was devastating. This was not forgiveness. This was not grace. It was professionalism in its purest, most absolute form. Her humanity was so far beyond his that she didn't even need to forgive him to save his wife's life. She was simply operating on a higher plane of morality and duty. The weight of it all finally broke him. Frank Miller, the tough cop, the man who had terrorized and bullied, crumpled. He didn't fall, but his body seemed to fold in on itself. A raw, guttural sob escaped his lips, a sound of utter and complete defeat. Tears streamed down his face, hot and shameful. "I'm sorry." He wept the words torn from his soul. "God, I am so sorry." Ariana simply watched him for a moment, her expression unchanging. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned and walked away, back down the corridor, back to her world of saving lives, leaving him alone with his shame and the crushing, unbearable weight of a debt he could never possibly repay. The karma wasn't loud or vengeful. It was a quiet, profound reckoning that would force him every day for the rest of his life to remember that his family's future was secured by the grace and professionalism of the woman he had tried to destroy. The story of Dr. Ariana Williams and Frank Miller isn't just a tale of a traffic stop gone wrong. It's a powerful illustration of how prejudice can shatter lives in an instant. But more importantly, it's a story of ultimate karma. Not the loud, explosive revenge we often see in movies, but something quieter, deeper, and far more profound. Miller didn't just lose his job. He was forced to confront his own monstrous behavior in the most personal way, imaginable, seeking salvation for his family from the very person he had dehumanized. Dr. Williams's response, grounded not in vengeance, but in her unwavering commitment to her professional oath and her own humanity, is a testament to a strength that his hatred could never comprehend. Her victory wasn't in his downfall, but in her refusal to let his darkness diminish her own light. If this story of justice and poetic karma moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. What would you have done in Dr. Williams's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.